I feel very self-sufficient because I know how to like just find what I need and then incorporate it. It was crazy to like kind of come to terms with. I was like, oh, I just read that book in a day and like actually use the information immediately. And I just feel like I'm actually using the information for something tangible, for something practical in a way that I didn't really get to before. Academia still just was not the right fit for me. The workload, the stress was not aligned with what I needed for my mental health and functioning because there's part of me that does still love teaching, but I think it's been really healing to be away from academia because it's given me this like distance to really see, okay, that was not aligned with your values. That is not aligned with the things that you need to function. And it's good that I've moved towards something else. I want to be a person. I am a person. I have other things in my life. And like the best job is going to be the job that is a part of my life and not my whole life. I have actual agency over what I do. It's really scary to bring up the ways that the place where you work does harm and the ways that you might do harm by upholding those systems. But in talking about it and being open about it, that's how we change.
I think everyone can be so scared of being called out that they're not willing to be called into the solution. I think it's worthwhile that we all just do some level of cleaning up the community on a systemic level so that the people who follow can benefit from that. The idea of you plant a tree knowing that you'll never bask in its shade, but that somebody else will. That mentality, I feel like, could be more prominent in our society.
Today on Science with Impact.
My name is Adri Corrales. I used to go by Dr. Corrales or Dr. Adri Corrales, but it's liberating to not use the title sometimes. I'm currently a public programs and exhibit developer at the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry, and I've been working there for a couple of months and really been enjoying it.
Would you be open to sharing something about you that's not related to work and not related to how smart you are?
I love that. Oh, here's one. I'm non-binary. And also, I am a dog parent. And that's, I feel like, a huge part of my identity is like me and my dog child. And her name is Zelda.
And what kind of dog is Zelda?
She is a little curly haired mutt. She's got pointy ears.
Very cute. Could you tell me what your definition of alt academia is?
Okay. So, in thinking about alt academia, I'm thinking that's basically any career outside of that kind of traditional pipeline of going from grad school to some kind of like professorship or teaching or researching at a university. So, just careers that are alternative to academia, generally ones that you're probably not exposed to in graduate school. They're not the traditional ones like you either go into academia or maybe you go into industry, but still something else. Because when you go to grad school, you have a lot of transferable skills and things that you could do in a lot of different arenas. And that's where those alternatives to academia type of careers come in. It's these things we totally could be doing based on all the skills that we've grown that we wouldn't have necessarily been pointed to in our career going through grad school.
I love that you brought up the transferable skills. I've heard this referred to as connecting the dots, like connecting the dot between what you can do and how it can apply elsewhere. Could you tell me some of the transferable skills that you've identified making the switch from academic research to programming?
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot lately as those kind of transferable skills. I feel like I'm really good at looking up information when I don't know how to do something. And I feel like I'm just very good at that aspect of researching that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with researching, reading an article, and then writing it up, but actually finding the information to use in a practical sense. I feel like I've gotten very good at that and having that skill from graduate school and just troubleshooting things because I feel like I taught myself a lot of stuff when I was in grad school. And then also when I was a postdoc, I had to learn things on my own a lot of the time. And I feel like now I'm in this role, I feel very self-sufficient because I know how to like just find what I need and then incorporate it. And other transferable skills is a lot of reading in this job, I realize, especially because I'm learning a whole new field. Museum education is and like informal learning environments has its own like body of research that I'm now getting more into. And I feel like I'm really good at just reading large amounts of material quickly. It was crazy to like kind of come to terms with. I was like, oh, I just read that book in a day and like actually used the information immediately. And that was just so crazy to me to be like, oh wow, I really can do that. So it's like having that skill of being able to go through just pour through like large amounts of information and then getting something tangible and usable from it. Something else, a transferable skill, I think would be, I know there's like a ton, but those are the two that I think come to mind.
What's cool about both of those that you brought up is that you connected to how you can use those tools or those skill sets immediately and practically. Can you unpack why that's so exciting coming from like an academic career?
Yeah, I'm so glad you pointed that out because this has shown me this is how people, I don't know if like in the field is the right word, but it's just like how it feels because we're up close with different like with students, with kids, we're teaching them things, even teaching adults, but we have to use things practically because we're teaching and we're creating programs and like actually doing things with the community and the public every day. And I feel in academia, a lot of time you're researching something to write an article, to publish, and present at a conference. Whereas at a job like this, I'm doing research to find materials to actually teach someone or to create a program that will be a part of some kind of learning experience. And I just feel like I'm actually using the information for something tangible, for something practical in a way that I didn't really get to before. Even though I was an educator and I was teaching organic chemistry, I don't feel that I was able to use my research very effectively because that was not the focus of the role. The focus of the role was research and publishing and presenting at conferences. The role was not to be an educator using evidence-based practices. And now it feels like all we do is use different resources from the literature. And a lot of the time, the literature we're using isn't necessarily the primary resource. It's something that it's usually like a combination of resources that are written into a practical guide. And then I read the practical guide and I see where the primary literature is from, but I don't necessarily have to go all the way back because I need the sort of recommendations at the end. I need those pieces to use. So it's a whole different side because it feels, oh, we're using this right now in the moment. We're not going to publish this later and then 2 years later maybe someone else will use our work. We're using it now.
I really like that because it highlights that the education research is valuable because it can inform practical guides. But there's this gap in between. We've published the research article, we've presented it at a conference, and now that work is done. And now we're doing this one because we have to continue versus taking that information and transforming it into a practical guide, into something that people can actually use, the people who are practicing the science education. So, could you tell me more about what's your perception of that gap between like where the modality of the research ends and where it becomes transformed into something that's usable?
So where I'm seeing that gap is that while I do still read primary literature, a lot of the time that's only for just like my information and edification and learning things, but I'm not necessarily using it like in the moment. A lot of the time I'm going more toward these guides that are created by different associations. So ASTC, which I think is the Association of Science Teaching. And so I'll read their guide instead, and it'll give me main points, and it'll give me bullet points, and it'll give me examples of how they use this guide to develop some program. And then I'll use that instead. But that guide is created by that association, and someone is putting in the legwork there to turn all of these primary literature sources into that guide that I'm going to use. And so I notice that especially in these like deeper fields that there aren't a lot of like groups making those types of accessible guides. Like you were saying a second ago, we're publishing an article and now we're moving on to the next instead of thinking about, okay, how do I make this digestible to practitioners? And so then I've really noticed like those articles, like primary literature, isn't getting used for a very obvious reason. It's not acceptable and practical to me in the moment. And so it's not necessarily going to be something that I use to develop a program or actually use it with the public. And it's really shown like I haven't felt the need to use any of that primary literature on top of the fact that museums and other orgs like this don't have access. We don't have subscriptions to a lot of the primary literature. We have some. There's a program for informal science where you can access some literature, but all of it's mostly based in like informal science research type of journals and that kind of stuff. So we're not really getting all that deeper information pretty much at all. Like I'm not accessing that. All the stuff that I used to access for my more researchy job, not even looking at it because it's just not relevant. And it's not made like useful in a way that I can actually take the time to read it.
What I love about that is that it gives you, because you went from that position to this one, it gives you an extremely clear idea as what we can do as discipline-based education researchers to make the work more practical and accessible. And I think taking our research and condensing it into a practical guide with main points and examples like you described is something that's really accessible and doable in Deeper. I think we could do that, and I bet the people could do really well with that, and then just post it somewhere public, maybe even through ASTE or other organizations to help them to be like, here's some information that you could continue to make a guide out of. Something like that could be really valuable. What do you think about that?
I 100% agree with that. I think that would be super helpful if we were starting to get like these guides, like these that have bullet points of practical evidence and honestly that are more aesthetically pleasing would be nice too. Because I use these guides from these different informal science resources all the time. I used one on climate science education that was really helpful. That gave me actual like kind of blocks of talking points. Here are some questions that you could ask in whatever kind of event you're planning. So whether it's a forum or it's just an informal science night or something like that, I had actual box of questions that I could use, and then they're all cited. So if I want to go back to the primary literature to see how they do it, I could, and I have access to that to expand on anything I'm interested in, but it gives me a really good starting point to actually use. And I think that we could totally do that in Deeper. And all we need to be doing now is like valuing that type of work because making readable, easily readable and usable guides like that is hard. That's hard work. Like the design of it even is hard. And just even like the graphic design of it is hard. Of making like useful charts and graphs and figures is hard. But that's the kind of work that I think would be valuable to practitioners, people who are making programs.
Yeah, I agree. And that could even be something that the institutions or departments could invest in, giving a Deeper another job to do when they do so many things, because we're supposed to be statisticians and disciplinary experts, and then we're mentoring and we're writing and we're grant funding. It's just so much to be like, okay, cool. Now you are an expert in informal science communication, graphic design, go. That part would probably be hard. For anybody who has a proclivity for that or could see a role for that, then I would definitely encourage that too. Which one has been really useful to you?
Yeah, I do have one. I was looking at it today. It's the ASTC Seeding Action for Climate Education guide. And I've been using that one. That's the one that I was talking about earlier. And it was really useful in thinking about, okay, we want to start and sustain dialogues about climate science and talking about climate change with adults, with children, with basically intergenerational like families and just all kinds of people. And that guide was so helpful, and I'm using it right now to develop a program for basically like family science interaction talking about climate change. And one of the things I found really valuable in it is it gave really interesting like conversation starters and questions about talking about climate change anxiety and climate anxiety and talking about our feelings around climate change. Because that's a huge part of having the conversation. So beyond trying to talk about content, it's being able to talk about how does this make you feel? Because this is a really serious thing that we're dealing with. And it's something that's really scary, especially for kids. And to be able to actually like comfort and instill some hope and help like kids, especially talk through that fear is such a huge part of it that you don't necessarily see in the primary literature that it's highlighted, but it is highlighted in these guides that are referencing more like case studies and such and talking about those things. And it's just been so helpful to frame like how we don't just scare everybody with climate science, but we have this outlet for, yes, this is serious and it is scary, but we're going to talk about it and at least acknowledge our fears and then talk about, okay, how can we be involved in our community going forward to combat these things in the ways that we can that are sustainable and reasonable for us. So,
I love
yeah,
that.
I think it was so helpful. I wouldn't have been able to articulate that as well as I have so far without that guide, because it really gave me a perfect summary of what I needed to know to develop this kind of programming.
So excited to shout them out. And when I go to make this a video, I'll try to put visuals and things like that for it. So, which specific decision points or events happened that led you to your current alt academic career?
Okay. Some specific points that made me go this direction. It started a long time ago when I first decided I wanted to go to grad school. I was doing a degree in chemistry. It was a PhD program, and I was doing biochemistry related research and organic related research, and it just was not for me. I feel like I was undiagnosed ADHD at the time. I didn't know I was autistic, and the environment was not good for my mental health. And as much as I did working in the lab, I made a lot of mistakes, especially just like forgetting stuff or leaving something somewhere too long. And I just didn't know how to handle a lot of that stuff. And it was really disappointing because I was like, but this is what I want to do. I thought I wanted to do research and like bench research. And I realized like I find science and organic chemistry in particular very interesting, but I don't know that I necessarily wanted to work in a wet lab. And so that's when I ended up just getting my master's. I say just, that's not a big accomplishment, but that was how it felt at the time. And that was how people reacted to it at the time, was like, oh, you're just going to leave with your master's. And so you feel bad about yourself for it. But I did find a love of teaching there. And I started working at the local science museum in San Diego. And I really liked it. I had a really good time being a science educator. And it's something that I always had in the back of my mind, like maybe I'll come back to. I left there to get my PhD now in math and science education, pursue that sort of love of education more and to learn more. And throughout the course of that, I was like, maybe I do still want to do academia. I just want to do it in this different way that focuses on teaching and education research. So I pursued that, went on to do postdoc, developing my skills. And then also it gave me an opportunity to teach at a university, which is something I've always wanted to do. And so I tried it out. Academia still just was not the right fit for me. The workload, the stress was not aligned with what I needed for my like mental health and functioning. And I had a good amount of negative experiences with people at conferences and just at my job day to day that really pointed me to maybe your skills could be better used elsewhere in a place that's going to be better for your mental health and just better for your overall well-being as a person. And I always had in the back of my mind, museums are always an option. There's something that you like. And so it just a job here at BMZ popped up as I was thinking about moving to Portland. It wasn't even something I was planning. It just kind of was like, oh, this might work. And so that's when I ended up applying for this job. We moved to Portland and I hadn't even gotten the job yet. I was just like, we'll figure it out, I'll find something. And it ended up working out and being a good fit. And that's how I made my way back to museums and to this kind of work. It was like I knew I needed to learn more before I came back to museums. I knew there was just so much more that I wanted to learn. And now I feel like I've learned so much and I feel like I have a really good handle on whenever I want to learn more, I can and I know how. And I'm like bringing that to this role. And I think it's so far is a really good fit. And it's a good fit for my mental health because there's enough like independent work that I can do that's aligned with what I need. And there's also enough collaboration that I know I'm not alone and that I'll be able to get help when I need to and work in a team when I need to. I think it's worked out really nicely. You just take a chance on stuff and it'll work out. So that's kind of what happened.
So, what I'm hearing is that you took a huge chance because you were moving from one part of the country to the other and weren't sure what you were going to do for work, but you knew that you didn't want to do academia. So, you were keeping your mind open to basically anything but academia. Is that right?
Yeah, 100%. There was like in the back of my mind, I was like, oh, maybe I could just adjunct at PCC for a little while if they'll have me, Portland Community College, if they'll have me, that'd be cool. because there's part of me that does still love teaching, but I think it's been really healing to be away from academia because it's given me this like distance to really see, okay, that was not aligned with your values. That is not aligned with the things that you need to function. And it's good that I've moved towards something else.
I love that. Gives us a really easy introduction into the second question. But before we go there, I would really love to know more about your relationship with museums. You mentioned that you needed more time to find your way back. Can you tell me about your history with museums and what they mean to you?
Yeah. So I've been a museum lover for a very long time, but I'd never thought about it as like a place that would be like my career. I never associated with a job or working. It's just something I really liked and thought was cool. And as a little kid, I'm still this way. I'm the person that reads every single thing of every exhibit and really takes it in and takes my time. If I'm going to a museum, that is my full day. And I'm going to go to every single thing and think about it and think about how it fits together. I feel like I've always been like that and enjoyed museums in that way. It's very like I really get sucked into the different exhibits. And so loved going as a kid, never thought of it as like a job or anything. It was always you go to college, you do the research, you find whatever the hardest or most prestigious thing is there. That's what you do. I never associated with working a job. It was actually fun. So I didn't even think of it as work. I just liked it. Like going to museums for fun. I had an opportunity to work at a science museum when I was in between grad schools. And I always kept it in the back of my mind. This would be really cool. And I've met other people who work at museums and I really admire. And so that started to like really put in the back of my mind, like, maybe this is for you. But right now we have to explore this path that you've chosen and see if this is right for you first before you try something else. It was like I really wanted to see it through, really, see it through to like getting to the faculty position to see if that was what I wanted. And I did. I feel like I saw it through. I tried it. It wasn't for me. And then I still had in the back of my mind, like, I would be good at this and I would like it because it's a place I like to go. And maybe it won't feel so much like work because I like being there. And so far, that's pretty much been the case. Like, I don't feel like I've gotten super stressed or overwhelmed because I like being here.
I love hearing about your relationship with museums. I can relate. There was this museum that I grew up next to called the Museum of Science and Industry. It's Mosey in Tampa.
Nice.
In the summer, my family couldn't afford childcare, and there's not a whole lot of safe spaces to take your kids for the day. And so my grandmother or my mom would drop me off there and then go work. And it was one of the only places that was like free. You could go and do the library. They had
Mm-hmm.
computers and they had a really cool gift store that you could explore all the things without having to pay for them. Unless you wanted to take it home, then you obviously had to pay for it. But all the exhibits were free. And every now and then, one of the museum people would notice that I was there all day and would let me go into their IMAX theater for free. And it was one of those IMAXs. It's like one of the only ones that isn't just a big screen. It's a screen that's curved and it fully encompasses you. The first time I did it, I had to run out crying. It was a sensory overload. Like it was just too much sound, too much. It made the seas go boom like this. It took me 2 or 3 times until I started to fall in love with it and then just felt, okay, I just have to relinquish control and let myself go into the movie and just be in it. And before that, I couldn't do movies. And so it was really nice to have that exposure. So anyway, I just really love museums. And so I don't know if
Yeah.
that connects with you, but what you do is really cool and very special to a lot of people who love to learn in a really introverted way and don't love to be told, read this and then write all this stuff about it and then like group work. Some people just really love to just take their time and explore things that are tangible, but then you can read it at your own pace. There's just a really
Mm-hmm.
special place to learn things. I think museums are. Thank you for what you do.
I love the way you put that and the way you described how it really is like free choice learning and learning at your own pace. And that to me is also why I think I've been so drawn to it because I also just really, I also learn like want to go at my own pace and my own speed and not have to necessarily be told what to do and being able to make those choices of what I want to learn about. I guess I never thought about it exactly that way. I love the way you put that's exactly it. That's exactly that feeling. It's so nice and freeing.
Oh, that feeling is amazing. I love science, especially when I got to do the thing where they're like, okay, you go to the reading corner. I would always pick a science book and then I'd want to just sit there and just read that. And that was my favorite science learning spot. And the museum was my favorite. It was never science class. No offense to any of my teachers.
Mhm.
It's just that wasn't for me. I really loved just getting to absorb and learn whatever I wanted to. And then I'd love to go up to somebody and be like, hey, did you see that exhibit that they had about blah, blah, blah? They had the body exhibit in there a ton when I was young. And so, like, I learned so much about anatomy and bones and muscles
Mhm.
and how they all come together. And yeah, anyway, I love museums. So I could talk about that all day. The yay museums.
Oh, I love that.
All right. So you mentioned earlier that your values as a person you felt weren't really being honored in the academic spaces, neither were your needs to function as a human. Can you explore with me how did the decisions that you made at those different points and transitions in your career align with what you value and what you want out of your life's work?
So, in like thinking about like making the decision to work at this type of job was just analyzing like how the things in my previous job just were not the right fit for me. I was very am still very committed to social justice and equity, and I just really came to this point where I felt like I could do this type of work somewhere else where it is valued and where it will directly impact. I just didn't feel like I was in a place where I could actually do that work and feel like it was making a difference. Like even just like seeing the ways that student voices are being suppressed now and their protesting being suppressed, like that's how that like faculty are also being like suppressed. There's so much that we cannot do or say, and if we do say them, there's retaliation. And it just felt like I would be better off somewhere where I can actually voice what I think and actually champion like equity and social justice. And so that's when I started moving more towards the museum space. And that's you run into other issues. You think about like the colonial history of like museums and like the issues with museums and keeping those in mind too. But it felt like because especially where I work now is such like a community centered space and there's so much work going on to actually connect with the people that live here, and the people that work here are the people that live here and live by this place, and so it's really actively being shaped by the community. And so it just feels we have a lot more access to making an impact and empowering people that live in our community. Like I'm able to talk about like issues of equity in a very direct way. And then the people that I work with are like, yes, these are things we need to focus on. Here's our plan for doing that in this specific program. Now let's get this funded and do. And it just feels like there's more that we can do. It's not perfect, and I feel like there's still a lot of work to be done in interrogating the issues with museums. But I feel like in a lot of ways we're doing that, and that's really cool to see that people are open to that. And yeah, it's so much more well aligned. And then especially having a lot more freedom as far as what I'm working on each day has helped a lot. And I feel like I have the freedom to express my needs at work. It just feels like I'm able to accommodate myself in a lot more ways than I used to. And then the subject matter that we study is a lot more aligned like what I believe in. So yeah, it's just it's I feel like it's like we're moving closer and closer to a job that doesn't feel like a job. Right now, I don't feel like I'm building a career. I feel like a person who enjoys this aspect of their life and their work, but also has other things outside of that that I'm able to pursue. And being that way and really valuing all aspects of my life has made a huge difference for just my mental health and everything because not everything hinges on the career. Now it's something that I enjoy that's a part of my life, but it's not my whole life.
You might find this unsurprising, but I've now interviewed 3 academics who are alt academics, and all
Yeah.
3 expressed these 3 patterns. They want freedom in their work. They want to be a person first, not just a person when they have time in between their academic job. And they want to have an actual impact, a direct impact that they can see. And so I just
Yeah.
find that so fascinating because all four of us, if I'm including myself, went out academic for the exact same 3 reasons. So I just wanted to express that. What do you think about that?
It's not surprising at all, especially knowing everyone that you're talking about. That makes so much sense because I feel like those have always been like when we're talking or having, those are our biggest complaints. Is I want to be a person. I am a person. I have other things in my life. And like the best job is going to be the job that is a part of my life and not my whole life. And to have that now is so liberating. I get to come here and do my work and have a pretty good time, and it's interesting. I enjoy the subject matter. And then I get to go home and I get to do all of my other hobbies and things I like to do and do my arts and crafts and go out in the community and meet people and be a part of mutual aid and actually have time to contribute to that. I'm just so happy that I finally got to that point that I can do that. I feel like I have control of my own life.
Yeah.
I have actual agency over what I do.
That's so essential. I love that. So freedomhood, personhood, or freedom, personhood, and impact. That seems to be the quick summary of this is why we choose these things. You mentioned the difference between advancing equity in a governmental institution versus a nonprofit or business organization. Could you dive into that for me more?
Sure. Yeah, this is something that I've been thinking about a lot. And it's still something that I grapple with because I know there are limitations still, even where I'm at currently. In academia and working for that type of organization, it really felt like you were set up to fail. And I definitely like now looking back on the things that you would start and try to do, it generally seemed set up to fail, especially because everyone is already so overworked and busy. So many things get dropped or fall through the cracks because there's just not enough time in the day. And I think a big part of me getting burnt out was because there were so many things that I wanted to do. And that such a big part of my motivation for being there was for advancing equity and for making a difference, making a change. And that wasn't necessarily valued as a part of my job. And so that was all extra. It was all extra on top because it was important to me. Then I ended up burning myself out because I was doing the things that were required in my job plus these extra things, and then feeling very much like I was failing at all of them because there just wasn't enough time to do it all. And at least here in this different type of, this is a nonprofit, and of course there are issues with nonprofits too and limitations because at the end of the day, a lot of it is dependent on wealthy donors and grants awarded, foundational grants, governmental grants. So there's still those kinds of limitations. But I do feel like the work-life balance is still there. I don't see people, at least in my department, are working beyond their 40 hours. We work our hours and we go home. And we're never, at least like where I work, which I think I'm honestly really lucky to be where I work, is that like we're very on top of your hours. Don't work past your hours. Let's make sure these goals that you have for this week are actually going to be able to happen in that amount of time, be realistic. And I know this isn't the case for all nonprofits, but at least here, I feel like we actually have the time to dedicate to these things. And like within our mission statement, like it literally says, we lead with race. We take race into account and make sure that we understand like systemic racism and how that impacts who is able to even come to our museum. And those are not things that I would even see in a university type mission statement, especially where I used to work, where they got rid of all of the DEI offices to begin with. And that was really setting people up to fail because there weren't supports for that work. That was all extra work you were doing because you cared, because you wanted to change things, because you saw harm being done. Whereas, like in my new job, I think there's a lot more time to actually dedicate to that because that is an integral part of the job. It's like a big reason why they hired me. It's because I have expertise in that area. And that's like what we're working towards, making sure things are actually inclusive and that we're actually listening to the community. And when they say, no, we don't want that, or no, that's offensive, we're listening. We're not doing that. It feels more responsive, like responsive to the community in this new role.
You touched on in that 2 things that I'd like to expand on, and you can take them in whatever order you like. One is that it sounds like with there's not enough time in the day and feeling like we're failing on multiple fronts and having 40 hours a week and then being done. It sounds like academia in the previous interview, me and Melissa talked about there being opaque expectations where it's just not very clear what it is that you're supposed to be excelling at. It feels like you're supposed to be excelling at everything all at once. Unclear expectations in academia is one thing I'd like to explore. And then you mentioned the closing of DEI offices in academia, and I'd really like to explore your perspective on that, especially given the context of what you're doing now at the museum.
So as far as the unclear expectations, I love that Melissa brought that up because we have talked about that a ton with each other. But it really does feel like you have to be good at everything. When you think about, even if I go back and look at my job description and my offer letter, it's so vague. It's one sentence of what I was supposed to be doing. And it in no way guided me to what I was actually going to be responsible for. And I feel like, especially in the position I had, they had never had someone in that position before who was a postdoc, who was also teaching full time, and then also doing research full time at the same time. They'd never had a postdoc like that in that department before. So I don't think they knew what to do with me. And it was very unclear what my position actually was. Was I a postdoc? Was I faculty? It kept switching back and forth depending on how they wanted to use me. I'm faculty when they want me to take responsibility for this big thing, but I'm only a postdoc when I want to speak up about something. And that kind of ambiguous position was absolutely weaponized against me in a lot of ways. And I feel like it's probably happened, I'm sure, to other teaching postdocs in the past. But I think it was extremely unclear what my goal was and what I was supposed to be doing there. And that wasn't just my position, like other faculty. It was unclear how they were being evaluated for tenure. And there weren't enough people with tenure to mentor the tenure track faculty in what they needed to know. And so I feel like it perpetuated through a lot of different positions. We really didn't know what we were responsible for necessarily, but the big thing was like, don't drop anything. You have to make sure nothing falls and nothing breaks. And there was no clarity as far as like, whose responsibility those things were. It was tough. And then, can you repeat the second one again?
Thank you for that. That's really clear. Just going to the first thing about how the lack of clarity in our job descriptions as academics can be weaponized against us. And given that our promotions and tenure and advancement in our career is dependent on our performance, by not clearly spelling out what performance looks like, it forces us to just perform exceptionally in as many ways as possible that are directly measurable. And since impact in education might not necessarily be something that you can really measure that way, it makes sense that there's a divide between what it is that we're trying to do, where we're trying to have impact, and where we can have impact. So anyway, I just wanted to highlight that. That's really valuable and useful. The second thing was just mentioning the closing of DEI offices at your previous institution. That was one of the things that happened. It's come up. It came up in my conversation with Morgan about what that means for their roles and their perspective on advancing equity work. I'd love to know your perspective, especially given what you do at the museum.
So when that happened, I was still working at an institution in Texas, and the entirety of Texas, they defunded and closed all of the DEI offices. And I remember when that bill passed, we hadn't gotten a whole lot of communication from our institution about what do we do now? What does this mean? What does this mean for research that we were doing? I was really concerned about a grant that I was on at that time and whether or not that was still going to be honored. I was concerned about supports for my students because I had a certain list of resources that I would give my students and direct them to that I knew about that were now going to go away or be put in some other department. And I was asking for, okay, how are you restructuring so that I can tell my students where to go? And there wasn't a lot of clarity because I don't think they knew how to handle that. And I think that it was terribly mismanaged and just caused a lot of stress for a lot of people, and especially people who were really worried, are they going to lose their jobs? What's going to happen to them? And I think that, and I know you and I had a conversation about this when it was happening, was that we were doing this work without DEI offices. We can continue to do this work. And I think that's very true. But I think it scared a lot of people And I think it probably closed down a lot of work and a lot of conversations that were being had because people were scared about their jobs, because people were starting to get fired at different institutions for speaking out. And even thinking about it now, it was one of the reasons why I decided to leave. Because as a queer faculty member, a queer person of color there, I didn't feel safe. I didn't really feel safe here. And that was also a big part of it that I don't know that gets talked about as much, is that in being at an institution like that, I feel like I was in danger in a lot of ways. And so part of it was like, I need to go somewhere where I'm going to feel like safe as a human being. And so I think that was like really my big takeaways from it, and like how I felt when all of that happened. Because as much as I wanted to stay because I cared about my students and I was worried about their safety, that was one of my biggest questions. Okay, what do I tell my students? Where are they supposed to go? I also feared for my own safety and acceptance at that institution.
That sounds really traumatic. And I'm sorry that you've had to experience that. For me, it was like I started researching equity in 2017 in chemistry. It wasn't really talked about a lot unless it was like, how do we fix those people? It wasn't really talked about like, how do we fix the system here? And I like to think that I had a little bit of a role helping correct that a little bit, although I did participate in it initially because I was like, okay, I guess this is how we talk about this. And it took some critical scholars in the education department at the University of South Florida, so shout out to them. It took them pointing out the flaws in my argument and then going, oh, like I haven't even thought of that, and getting introduced to this more systemic way of thinking. Systems thinking is so well supported in chemistry when we're talking specifically about chemical systems. But when we're talking about systems thinking in terms of people and society and education and resources and racism and marginalization, that's when it starts to be an issue for people sometimes. 2020 came around, and what I noticed was a little scary to me. It was like suddenly there was this person that has been martyrized, and now everyone wants to participate in doing this type of equity research and advancement. And for me, it was like, it's great that so many people want to make a difference in this space. It's needed. But I noticed that a lot of the funding and the resources went to people who hadn't been doing that, like way before me. That a lot of the credit and the citations and the research and the funding weren't going to people who've been advancing this since the 40s and 50s. Instead, it's been redirected to people who are rephrasing it in a way that I think reduces the impact of equity research. And now there's a huge backlash because of the huge push forward that followed in 2020. And now this huge backlash is undoing all of the hard-earned work from all those people who were doing it against the system before the system supported it. And now it's like even more against the system because it's like pushing back. The change in that has been so dramatic. I also recognize that they are governmental institutions. Institutions are inherently racialized institutions, in my opinion. And because of that, they have to follow the whims and wills of politicians and whatever the media and public perception of critical theory is. That's the way it goes, unfortunately. So I really am grateful for spaces like nonprofits, business organizations that can go beyond what the government allows and can do an impact in a way that they see meaningful, that doesn't hurt anyone. So anyway, I'm really proud that you found a spot where you can have an impact and that your office won't get closed for saying the word racism and for trying to make things better.
Yeah. Also love that you highlighted the education department, because I absolutely had a similar like relationship and like experience with the education department. They're just so much further ahead than people who are doing deeper research, and like having education, like people in an education department to talk to also like really changed a lot of things for me and made me see things that I wasn't seeing and expanded my worldview. Like education departments doing that work, they're just, I feel like I had that exact same experience like when I was in grad school. It really, it's pushed me because as like progressive as I feel like I am, it's like there's always more to learn and always more like push. There's always going to be like things that you don't know, and we're all like saying things that we'll look back in hindsight and be like, ooh, I shouldn't have said that. And
Yeah.
I feel like my experience with the education department was a really good push to learn more and do better and understand systems better and the ways that they're harming people, harming us.
Yeah. One thing that I feel like we're both expressing in our time as discipline-based education researchers, there's a beauty around being a multi or interdisciplinary researcher. You're not just a chemist, you're a statistician, you're a social systems deconstructor. Depending on what your research is, it can be many things. But there's also an element of when your attention and your focus and your expertise is divided into that many components, there's only so much success that you can experience in learning all of the things that are valuable to being a chemist, an educator, a researcher, a statistician. And that's when we need to lean on the people who do this as a sole component of their career from people who experience this as people. So there's just this element of, I realized that Deeper is really cool in that there's multifaceted components to the role. But when it becomes disconnected from its source component, we are not as effective as we'd like to be. We are cheaper imitations, I think, sometimes of, whoa, I don't know why that visual just came up. It's like we're cheaper imitations of education if we don't consider the voices of those who are doing that as a whole of their career. I don't know if that's insightful.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Just like how you were talking about how there were people who have been doing this work for decades upon decades, but those aren't the people getting the funding. And it's just
Yeah.
like we need to honor who we learned from and the people who have been doing the work. The people that we cite, those original sources, those are the people that need to be highlighted because they worked really hard for us to even be allowed to do this work.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm chewing on some sort of idea that I'm having a hard time like turning into words, but there's this idea that so discipline-based education research tends to exist now underneath science departments. And the reason that I've surmised, which could be wrong, this is just my perspective of it, is the reason that we exist in those departments instead of in the education department is that Deebers wanted to be considered real scientists. Like they wanted to be in the chemistry department. They didn't want to be hired as the people who changed the education of their department. They wanted to be hired as people who do independent research the way that their colleagues do independent chemistry research. The organic synthesis down the hall doesn't need to apply their research to improve the institution's organic synthesis necessarily. So the education researcher down the hall would not be incumbent to do the same for the institution. And I feel like in fighting so hard to make Deeper a thing, to make space for people who want to do discipline-based science education research, which was, I'm sure, a very difficult fight that neither of us had to participate in, because by the time we got into this career, there's already PhD programs available. I feel like in fighting that fight, maybe we overcorrected a bit, and that there is value to Deeper inside of an education department. And there's value to separating, like, these are scientists working with entities that can be reduced to quantifiable variables and metrics that are predictable. And then these are the chemists who are trying to change education, which is just simply not the same thing because there's people involved. And I feel like Deebers can lose sight of those two things, that we think that we can do experiments on our students the way that people do experiments on chemicals, and it's just not the same.
Yeah. No, I like the way you put that entirely. Like, I feel like we've probably played with this idea or talked about this idea before
Yeah.
of just like,
so.
yeah, I think we worked so hard to establish ourselves in Deeper as a field. When I say us, I mean the people in the field.
Yeah.
And like people who established themselves like long before we did. We lost the plot. It definitely feels like we
Yeah.
lost the plot at a point. What was the point of doing Deeper? The point of doing Deeper was to transform education, to make it better, to understand how it works so that we can improve it. And somewhere along the way, it became about generating the research instead of generating like impacts.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's just like how I think that was another reason of why I knew it wasn't going to be for me because of the impact. I didn't feel like I was helping anyone. I didn't feel like the research I was doing was going to actually help anyone. It was just another paper to cite. And that was really hard for me and upsetting. I didn't like feel great after publishing a paper when I'm just like, is this going to help anyone? Is anyone going to read this and use this? And in my head, I'm like, Probably not. That was disappointing when I really came to that realization, like how far separated we are from the actual thing.
Yeah, and I think the systemic incentives, right? Like, I don't fault any individual deepers, the behaviors that the system promotes and demotes. And it's like careers are funded the same way research scientists are, which is something that they fought for. So that means citations in articles and grant dollars. And that's how you measure the success of a researcher, at least my understanding of it. And in education, that's a really limited scope of impact to me. It is to say, though, that their impact feels capped by the number of citations they can get and by the dollars that they can get in grant funding. And it feels like it would be better to align their research or education objectives with what serves their immediate community. Like, I remember hearing in spaces deepers going up for roles as assistant professors and researchers and being annoyed because the department would bring them in and be like, okay, cool. So you're going to fix our education, right? And they go, no, that's not what I do. I'm a researcher. Like, I do my own thing and I'm not here to fix your curriculum or your thing. I get it. But I also feel like that's a huge value to the university. You get to directly impact your community. You get to give back to this like machine that teaches people for better or for worse. There's a lot of impact that's left on the table when we're like, no, but we're researchers. I'd rather
Right.
not have a direct impact on my institution. I want to write a paper. I
Yeah.
don't know. This is something to think about. I'm sure somebody listening to this who is a deeper, and that is going to be the majority of the people who would listen to this, disagree with a lot of what we're saying. And I get it.
Yeah, imagine if they did they were like a deeper person housed in some kind of content department was there to transform the education and like the systems that are in place for education in that department. Imagine if that was a real thing and that type of position was valued at a university. It'd be really
Wouldn't that be
cool.
cool?
But that's not right. But that's not how those types of jobs and positions are structured because they structure all faculty's positions the same and they value specific things in their job description. And so I get why deeper people would like distinguish themselves that way and say, no, but we're researchers because they need that. They need that to get the job. But just imagine if they could do that. That's the kind of stuff I want to talk about. Imagine if we could do it differently. Imagine if we could hire someone who really wanted to transform a department, got credit for that, got tenure from that, from doing service and research. Imagine what that would be like.
Yeah. Research, service, and teaching, those are the three levers that are supposedly supposed to be equal in determining your promotions in academia. Grant funding is what it really comes down to in citation counts. But imagine a position where they're like, listen, grant funding is not your concern. You don't need to apply for grants. Our institution has enough funding to support this role. Where we really need a vested interest in is improving enrollment rates and improving retention in science. That's where, on a business level, our institution could see the most gain in revenue while also doing the best good in society. So, your role, your impact will be measured based on how well you're able to help change the department to retain our students who come here with an interest to do science, and how equitable that is, and how it affects enrollment rates downstream. If that's how your impact was measured, doing equity work would be really exciting and interesting. Because now it's like direct impact. Industry knows this so well. Business knows this so well that if you really want people to perform, you have to align what they want to achieve in their career with what's good for the company and for the business. And I feel like there's just not that in deeper sometimes.
Hear that.
All right, we're getting to the point where we get it. We've completed the 2 questions, and there's more follow-ups that I could ask, but I know that we're recording at 4, and I wanna give you time to just, like, decompress in between. So, how do you feel? Would you like to answer another follow-up on your second question, or are you ready to, like, let's close this and we'll pick it up again at 4?
I think let's do the final question and use that to wrap up.
Okay.
And yeah, I think that'd be good.
That sounds perfectly good to me. One thing that you said in your response is that in the museum, the community is actively shaping your programming. And one thing that you said that really stood out to me was that the museums themselves, as an entity, are open to interrogations of the limitations of museums. Do you feel like the same was true in academia? And if so, or if not, what is the same and what is different there?
So, in thinking, these are things honestly I've been thinking about a lot lately. So this is great. This is like what's been on my mind. In thinking about like academia is not prepared to interrogate its systems and the ways that they oppress people. Bringing that out to people in academia causes definitely some sore spots. And I've definitely had like conversations that have become very difficult and defensive because of bringing that up in the ways that like universities cause harm. And I even say it in a way of I used to work for a university, and there's are ways that I contributed to this system that causes harm. And that is okay to acknowledge because at the end of the day, like we're all going to be in some ways complicit in systems that cause harm. And it's about what do we do about that? What do we do with that moving forward? I feel like universities are not ready to hear that based on everything that we've seen in the past like 2 months of protesting at universities. We've seen like universities are not ready to interrogate this because it really just seems like universities and run as a business and a business about profit and not about students. And universities don't like hearing that. And that's tough. And then going to museums also have issues of, especially I would think about like maybe natural history or natural science museums will have different types of items, or art museums even will have items that were stolen from other cultures. And those are things that I know now museums are really trying to interrogate, not all of them. Of course, there's a lot of museums who are very much sticking to their like, these are our artifacts when they're not, they're stolen. But I think that at least I see that sort of deconstructing work being done more than I necessarily see with higher ups at universities. That's not to say, oh, museums are better. We should like all move towards going to museums because museums got a lot of work to do. He's got a lot of work to do. But I do feel empowered, at least in my specific job where I'm at in this one case. I feel empowered to acknowledge and talk about them. And I don't feel afraid. Whereas at a university is a lot scarier. Not to say it's not scary here, because I feel like speaking out like this is scary. It's really scary to bring up the ways that the place where you work does harm and the ways that you might do harm by upholding those systems. But in talking about it and being open about it, that's how we change. That's how we grow, and being open to actually like interrogating those things. So I feel like at least here, and I think it's because it's a smaller institution, there's less people who work here, there's a lot more room for growth and change. Like I have a lot more opportunity to discuss this with other people and other like-minded people who are like, yeah, I also agree. I think there's a lot of things about museums that we need to deconstruct that are actively harming the community that we need to work on to be a part of the community and actually empower and enrich the community here rather than like co-opting ideas or like stealing things. So that's how I see the difference, is that I do feel like there's more agency, at least where I'm at my specific institution, to talk about these things.
That makes a lot of sense. In terms of closing it up for today, being open to interrogating your participation in systems that hurt people, I think that's a great thing to reflect on.
Yeah, definitely. It's something that I think about all the time, is just like being aware of the ways that I might cause harm within whatever role that I have, and being able to work towards a place where we have systems that we've changed, replaced, whatever it ends up being, where we can stop doing that.
Yeah, I think everyone can be so scared of getting called out that they're not willing to called into the solution. Yeah, that's unfortunate. And we all make mistakes. I think people who do equity research more than anyone have made mistakes about advancing
Yeah.
equity.
I've made mistakes, like in
Same.
things I've written, and things that I read is
Yeah.
not what that is. That is completely off base.
Same.
Acknowledging that is really important.
Yeah, and just leaving space for the fact that we're all human beings who are flawed and doing the best that we can in the systems that we were raised in. But It can be really hard to challenge a system that educated you, that fed you, that seemingly raised you. It can be really hard to change or to, how do you say, confront those systems. But if you don't, then that's the legacy that you leave for your succeeders, whether or not you decide to procreate, like for the people who come behind you, for the next round, the next generation of people, that those are issues that you leave for them to address. I think it's worthwhile that we all just do some level of cleaning up the community on a systemic level so that the people who follow can benefit from that. The idea of you plant a tree knowing that you'll never bask in its shade, but that somebody else will. That mentality, I feel like, could be more prominent in our society.
I just love that so much. You see my face. I'm just like, that is so it. That's, yes.
There's all these conversations about, I didn't get that, so why should I care that these people get that? You're missing the point. If it was something that you had to endure, don't you want other people to not have to? Why should they endure trauma because you did? Like, the whole point of trauma is that it's something that happened in a life that you wouldn't want someone else to have to experience.
Yes, correct.
All right. Let's wrap it up. And thank you so much for your time today, Adri. I really appreciate it. And it was so nice to reconnect with you.
I know. This has been so great.
We're going to ask our third question, the last question on our list. So I'm excited for that. It's what advice would you offer yourself in grad school? I'm looking forward to sharing whatever wisdoms that we can with people who are currently trying to make their own decisions about what careers to pursue. All right.
Alrighty.
Bye.